The sun was sinking behind the mountains when Jacob Miles, a poor farmer, dragged his shovel across the dry earth. He wasn't digging a hole for seeds that day, he was digging a grave. The war had left the town full of bodies and empty pockets, and Jacob had taken the job no one else wanted. For every burial, he earned just enough to feed his old horse and keep the roof from caving in. They said the woman he was to bury had died in the storm. A stranger, no name, no family, just another lost soul brought in by the floodwaters. Wrapped in a torn blanket, her body looked small and fragile under the pale sky. Jacob whispered a short prayer, the same one he said for all of them. "May the Lord give you peace," he murmured, raising his shovel. Then, he heard it. A faint gasp, so soft, he thought the wind was playing tricks. He froze, leaned closer, and the sound came again, a ragged breath, like someone fighting through water. Jacob's heart pounded. He knelt, tore away the blanket, and the woman's chest moved. Her lips trembled. She was alive. "Dear God," he whispered. He grabbed her wrist, a pulse. Weak, but real. Without thinking, he lifted her in his arms. She was light, freezing cold, her skin pale as snow. He carried her to his wagon, shouting to the sky, "You're not dying today, miss." "Not if I can help it." At his farmhouse, he laid her on the old bed near the fire, covering her with every blanket he owned. Hours passed. He gave her water, wiped her face, prayed aloud until his voice cracked. Near dawn, her eyelids fluttered open. She stared at him, confused and frightened. Where am I?" she whispered. "You're safe," Jacob said softly. "Name's Jacob. You were nearly buried, but you're still here." Tears filled her eyes. "You saved me." He smiled weakly. "Just did what anyone would do." But he knew that wasn't true. No one else would have been out there. No one else would have heard her breath. She said her name was Clara Vance. She remembered a carriage accident, water, darkness, then nothing. She was from the city, she said, a teacher traveling to visit family before the storm took everything. She had no money, no one waiting for her. Jacob listened quietly. He had no family either. Just the land, the silence, and a field that never seemed to grow enough. For the next few weeks, Clara stayed in his farmhouse. She helped clean, cooked what little they had, and slowly regained her strength. The neighbors began to whisper that Jacob, the lonely farmer, had brought home a ghost. He didn't care. For the first time in years, laughter filled his house again. One evening, as the sun dipped below the fields, Clara stood on the porch, watching the golden light dance across the wheat. "I should leave soon," she said softly. "You've done enough for me." Jacob leaned against the rail. "Where would you go?" She smiled sadly. "Wherever God takes me." He looked down. "Then I reckon he's already done that." Their eyes met, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Something unspoken passed between them, something deeper than gratitude. But fate wasn't done testing them. Days later, a group of men arrived at the farm, soldiers searching for escaped property. They claimed Clara wasn't who she said she was. They said she belonged to a rich family, accused of theft and betrayal. Jacob stood his ground. "She's not what you're saying she is," he growled. The soldiers pushed past him, searching the house. Clara stood trembling, eyes wide. "Jacob," she whispered, "it's true I worked for them, but I didn't steal. I only tried to run when they wanted to sell me." Jacob stepped in front of her. "Then they'll have to go through me first." The soldier laughed. "You'd risk your life for her." Jacob's hands tightened around the shovel still leaning by the door, the same one he'd used the night he found her. "I already did once," he said coldly. The soldiers left with threats, but something in Jacob's eyes made them hesitate. After that day, he and Clara packed what little they owned and left the town behind. They traveled west, finding a small valley where no one knew their names. There, they built a new home, one plank, one sunrise at a time. Years passed. The farm grew green again, and so did Jacob's heart. Clara often teased him, saying, "You were hired to bury me, remember?" And he'd smile and reply, "Best mistake I ever made." When neighbors eventually asked about their story, Jacob would just say, "Once, I was paid to dig a grave. But instead, I found life." And every evening, as the sun sank low, Clara would sit by the window, her hand resting on the man who had saved her, not just from death, but from a world that had forgotten mercy. Because sometimes, miracles don't come in shining light or holy voices. Sometimes, they come from the hands of a struggling farmer, holding a shovel, and the courage to listen when the dead whisper, "I'm still here." Years rolled gently by like the wind across the wheat fields, and the story of Jacob and Clara became part of the quiet rhythm of the valley. They never had much, but what they had was enough: peace, laughter, and the kind of love that grows slowly, like roots sinking deep into the earth. Jacob would wake early every morning, watching Clara through the window as she hummed while making coffee. Sometimes, she would stop, look at him, and smile with that same softness she had the first time she truly saw him, not as the man who had buried the dead, but as the one who had breathed life back into her soul. The farm became their world. They planted fruit trees by the creek, fixed the old barn, and built a fence out of driftwood and hope. They worked together from dawn till dusk, hands scarred, hearts healed. Every seed that broke the ground felt like a small victory over the grave that once waited for her. Yet, some nights, when the rain fell hard, Clara would wake trembling, memories of that night flashing in her mind: the sound of thunder, the feel of mud, the weight of darkness. Jacob would pull her close, whispering, "You're here, Clara. You're safe. You made it." And she'd whisper back, "Because of you." But Jacob would always shake his head. "No, because of God. I just held the shovel." As years passed, their hair turned silver, but their bond never weakened. They became known across the valley, not as the poor farmer and the strange city woman, but as the couple who built a life from a miracle. People came for advice, for help, for warmth by their fire. Clara taught local children how to read. Jacob repaired neighbors' roofs without ever asking for payment. They gave, not because they had much, but because they had learned that giving was how one stayed alive in spirit. One spring afternoon, Clara fell ill. It started with a cough, then fever. Jacob tried everything: herbs, prayers, sleepless nights. He refused to leave her side. "You can't leave me, Clara," he whispered, gripping her hand. "Not after all this." She smiled faintly, her voice a fragile whisper. "Jacob, you once brought me back from death. If I go now, it's only to wait for you. You gave me more life than I ever dreamed of." Tears fell down his face, rough hands shaking. "You can't go. I ain't ready." She touched his cheek weakly. "Neither was I, the night you dug that grave." And then she was gone, as quietly as the rain that once saved her. Jacob sat beside her for hours, unable to move, unable to believe that the same hands that once saved her could not keep her now. The next morning, he walked out into the field with his old shovel. The earth was soft, the grass green. He dug with trembling arms, each movement a memory, each breath a prayer. He buried her under the apple tree they had planted together, the first tree that had ever grown on their land. He placed her favorite book and her wedding ring beside her. "You're home," he whispered. "And I'll see you soon." For years after, Jacob tended that tree like it was alive with her spirit. Every spring it blossomed white, every fall it dropped sweet fruit. Travelers would stop by for apples, and Jacob would tell them the story, not with sadness, but with pride. "I was hired to bury her," he'd say, smiling softly. "But she was the one who brought me back to life." When Jacob's time finally came, neighbors found him sitting peacefully under that same apple tree, head resting on his chest, shovel leaning against the trunk. The breeze moved gently through the blossoms, and for a moment, it felt like the whole valley was holding its breath. They buried him right beside her, under the shade of their tree. And every spring, the flowers bloomed brighter, sweeter, as if the earth itself remembered their love, because sometimes, love begins in the unlikeliest places: in a graveyard, in a storm, in the hands of a man hired to bury death, but chosen by fate to unearth life. And long after they were gone, when people passed through that valley and saw the apple tree standing alone by the farmhouse, they would hear the wind whisper softly through its leaves, "I was supposed to bury her, but she opened her eyes before the first shovelful."